Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I am J. Warner Wallace. Today we're going to talk about an objection that is in some ways tied to a technical courtroom term, but you probably heard it, something similar to it anyway. And that is this idea that, look, you Christians, or you people who believe in God, you theists, you believe in something that is a claim, an affirmative claim, that is not obvious to all of us. In other words, it's not standing right in front of us. And if you're going to claim this thing we can't see is true or exists, then the burden to prove it's true is on you guys who are making the affirmative claim. That's why sometimes you'll see that atheists will say, and I don't want to misquote people who might be watching the show who would claim that they're not believers, but I will often hear my friends and family who aren't believers say something akin to, well, you know, atheism is not an affirmative claim. I don't believe that something exists. You do. It's a lack of belief on my part. Why would they even say it that way? Why would anybody say that atheism is not an affirmative belief? It's a lack of belief, because it seems to remove the responsibility they would have then to substantiate an affirmative belief. If you're going to make a claim, then the burden of responsibility is on the person making the claim to actually defend the claim. This is why people, I think non-believers, will sometimes couch or describe their own lack of belief as a lack of belief rather than an affirmative belief. And so they'll say to us, the burden of responsibility, the burden of proof is on you, Mr. Christian or Mr. Theist. It's not on us. And until you can meet that burden, it's kind of like you would have in a courtroom where you would claim that the burden of proof is on the prosecution. The defense does not have to make a case. You have to make a case beyond a certain level of reasonable doubt as the prosecutor. There is no burden on the defense. Okay. That does seem to put a weight on us as Christians. And if we were to accept that that is true, that the only burden of proof is on the Christian or the theist, well, I actually am happy with that. I'm okay with it, if that was the case, because I'm happy to make the case. But I do have a lot of friends and family who are believers who probably wouldn't be as comfortable with that. And why? Because they're not as prepared to make that case to begin with. So I really think when I hear this objection, that the burden of proof is on you believers, you Christians or you theists, and it's not on us. So we're just going to sit here until you can, and by the way, we don't think you've demonstrated evidentially this is true. Okay, fine. I'm actually okay with that, but to understand that if you're feeling uncomfortable with that kind of burden, it's probably because you're now stuck thinking to yourself, well, how am I going to make this case? If all of us were prepared enough to make the case, I think we'd understand, we have enough understanding to be able to say, okay, fine, the burden's on me. You have 2 hours, let's sit down, I'll make the case. Now, let me just say something briefly in this episode of our show that I may do a whole show on at some point. And that's that I think the day for us to not be able to make the case, to be able to say, well, I had an experience, is over. If in the past you've said to your friends who are not believers, I believe Christianity is true because it changed my life in this way, well, get ready in a pluralistic, relativistic world where everyone's got some kind of transformation story, and it's not necessarily dependent on the God of the universe. I hear people tell stories of how Oprah Winfrey and watching that show has changed their life. If the only thing that demonstrates that Christianity is true is a changed life, Well, then what do I tell my Mormon friends and family who have had a changed life, they would say, on the basis of their religious beliefs in Mormonism? Or your Buddhist friends, or your Muslim friends, or just your secular humanist friends who have joined a movement that has changed their life? It's time for us to actually take on the responsibility as Christian case makers to explain why Christianity is true. Look, and I think I have said this in a recent podcast, but let me go back to it again. If I could tell you that there was one solution I could offer that would change the world, and you might be fed up with, if you're in America, with the growing division that we see politically, culturally, and you think, man, there's got to be a solution for this. Maybe you think your political candidate, whoever that was the solution. I'm going to tell you what the solution is. Because there is one solution that would unify a divisive country right now. There is one solution that would reduce crime. One solution that would reduce narcotics use. One solution that would reduce the rate of teenage pregnancy or unwanted pregnancies. How's that? One solution that would actually reduce the rate of disease, transmittable diseases. One solution that would decrease poverty. One solution that would be unifying and compassionate. There is a solution. I think you know what it is, don't you? It's called the gospel. It's called the gospel. The gospel is the one thing that explains the world the way it really is. Both the existence of a divine being and the fallen nature of rebellious humans who all have something in common. We're all equally rebellious, we're all equally in need of a Savior, and we're all equally saved if only we will take the free gift that's offered through Jesus Christ. Now, in order to know what this gospel is, I'd have to believe that there is a gospel that's offered by God and that it's actually available to me in a way that's reliable. I can trust that it's actually true what's being said. In other words, I'd have to know that there actually is a reliable word of God that tells me something about what the gospel is. Okay. So I guess the whole point I'm trying to make here is that if you're inclined to argue about politics or culture or anything you're seeing on your Facebook page, there's a better argument to be had. That is the case for Christianity. Make the case for why Christianity is true and resist the temptation, because you're going to get it on your social media when some aunt or cousin or uncle or somebody in your family, a friend, is going to say something on social media related to some political party, a candidate, a position, a bill being passed in Congress, something they saw in the current news. And you're going to want to push back and say something that's rooted really in the culture and politics and a candidate. Don't do it. Make the case for why they can trust the Bible is true and share the gospel. Because that is the thing that will accomplish all the other things. If all of us, as I've said before, believed that the Bible was reliable and took it seriously, what it teaches, we'd be unified. Now, do we see divisions? Of course we see divisions. Don't get me wrong. There are lots of non-essentials that we're going to divide over. I get that. But in the large scope of things, and the large things that matter, how did we get here? Why is it so messed up? And how do we fix it? Those three huge worldview questions will be unified. And if you're going to live out and take it seriously what the Bible says, here's the problem. There are lots of people who call themselves Christians who haven't even opened the Bible. They don't know what it says. Or there are people who are Christians who know what the Bible says, but they don't take it seriously. So my point here is, if we knew what the Bible said and we took it seriously, those two things will solve. Now, here's what I try to do in all of my social media. What I try to do even on this show is demonstrate why the Bible is true and you ought to take it seriously before I'll do anything else. You won't see politics on any of my social media feeds. I don't comment on the current events. I don't comment on politics. I stay in my lane because I'm a Christian case maker, which, by the way, if you're a Christian watching this show, that's what you are too. We need to know how to make the case. So when it comes to burden of proof, I'm actually okay that the burden of proof is on me as the Christian making the claim, because I'm prepared to make that case. Are you? Get ready and be prepared, because we're called to do that, and because it's time for us to accept our burden of proof. But when we come back from the break, I want to share with you that we're not the only ones who have a burden of proof. And we'll do that right after the break. I did 26 years working casework, and the better half of that in the end was working cold cases. And those cases got on national media. I think I've been on Dateline more than any other detective in the country. And the people who are involved in the process, if it's not that show or other media shows, are not always believers, but they get a sense of, well, this guy can puzzle a case together. Not that I'm the only one who can do that, but you develop that skill set. If you're working in this industry, trust me, if you're out there watching this video, you know, if you're a cop, how to put a case together. So once you've demonstrated that, I think, for people, they may not agree with your conclusion, but remember, the evidence doesn't say anything. And science doesn't say anything. It's scientists and evidence evaluators that say something. So we're all looking at the same data points. We're all looking at the same evidence. I've got to draw an inference from the evidence, and I land it this way. Now, you may not agree with my inferences, but I think you can at least respect the fact that I've done the homework of presenting the evidence so an audience can assess it for themselves. So that's why I think I have supporters who don't agree with my inferences, but they respect the process. And that's one of the things I try to do uniquely in God's Crime Scene. I'm trying to give the readers not just here are the facts, but here are how detectives assemble facts to develop a case. Here are the processes, the rules that we obey, how we put a cumulative case together. How do we make cases? That's what I want you to come away with also, not just here are the facts, because you can get that out of any book. I want this to be unique in the sense that this is a book that not only gives you the data, but it instructs you on how to build a case, how to put the data together. Now, we've been talking about burden of proof and how important it is for us to be ready to accept that burden as Christians. But I want you to know that you're not alone. And I don't want to offer this as a way to kind of encourage you not to get ready or not to be ready. In other words, the fact that everyone has a burden of proof does not mean that you're off the hook for making the case for what you believe. Because we could easily say, well, I'm not the only one who has a burden of proof. You also have a burden of proof. Therefore, we're done talking. Or there we go. Touche. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're not trying to get off the hook by putting somebody else on it. All of us have to be able to articulate why we think our view of the world is true. So let me offer it to you in 3 stages, okay? 3 claims that if we understand them properly will help us to see why the burden of proof is on all of us. Here's the first one. There are many questions. Look, atheists and theists, we agree that there are lots of big important questions. The most important questions, I think, in the universe, I've tried to address in a book I wrote called God's Crime Scene. And in God's Crime Scene, what I tried to do is say, look, I think there are 8 pieces of evidence in this room, the room we call the universe, that have to be explained. And these are the questions that really, the most significant work that's being done in the sciences, that's being done in philosophy, is probably being done around these 8 questions. How do we get here? How did the universe come into existence? Big question. Why does it appear to be fine-tuned for life? Good question. How did life originate in the universe? Good question. Why do biological organisms appear to be designed? That's, by the way, a very common feature of biology that everyone recognizes. Even the famed atheist Richard Dawkins recognizes that all of biology appears to have been designed for a purpose. Those are his words. But why does it appear to be that way? Good question. There's 4 good questions right in a row. Here's 4 more. Why is it that we have an experience of consciousness? And how does that emerge if this immaterial experience of consciousness is purely driven by a material set of cause and effects in a material universe? This is called the problem of mind. Why do we have minds? What is mind? What is it really? Good question. Where does it come from? Good question. Here's a 6th question. Why do we have free agency? If everything in the universe is determined by cause and effect, why would we think that we aren't determined by cause and effect? Why would we think that we're the only thing in the universe that is not purely physicalistic and determined by physical causes? Good question. Why do we think that some things are true from a moral perspective? Why do we believe that there are some objectively true moral claims? It's never okay to torture babies for fun. It never will be. Even if people violated that law, we would say they violated a law, a moral law. Even if it's not written in their books, we would say that's not right. You should not do that. That transcends all of us, all throughout history, all over the planet. Even in a universe in which there might be other civilizations, like a Star Trek universe, it wouldn't be okay to torture Klingon babies for the fun of it. So here we have another objective, transcendent law. Where do those things come from? Good question. And why do we have this persistent problem of evil and injustice? Why is that the case? We all see it, we all suffer, we all feel pain, we all die. Why is it this way? Good question. Those are 8 questions that all of us share, regardless of who you are, regardless of what worldview you hold. Those are questions I had before I was ever even a Christian. We have these questions because they are, I think, the most significant questions, and they drive probably the most research. If it's research into medicine, if it's research into cosmology, if it's research into biology, if it's philosophy that's being done on ethics, if it's philosophy being done on the problem of mind or free agency, these are what the big high-paid thinkers are thinking about. These are good questions, and we all recognize those questions, don't we? Okay. Well, it seems to me that that's just the first tip of the first leg of a 3-legged stool. We all, and that's this, that we all share common questions. And there are many of those. Let me give you step 2 in my thinking on this. Yes, there are many questions. But 2, there are only 2 kinds of possible answers. Only 2. That's right. I mean, you've got to answer these. I wish I could say there was another category for this, but there aren't. It turns out that when you look into a crime scene and you walk in a room and you see a crime scene or a death scene, you're not quite sure what you have. And you've got evidence in that room. And you can explain it one of 2 ways. You can explain it by staying in the room, or you can explain it by going outside of the room. In other words, I can explain all the evidence in this scene. Perhaps the victim who's in the scene is responsible for all of this evidence. If that's the case, it's either going to be a natural death, or it's going to be a suicide, or it's going to be an accidental death. But if I've got evidence in the room that cannot be explained by the victim in the room, foreign footprints, foreign DNA, footprints, bloody footprints leading out of the room. Oh boy, now I've got to go outside the room for the best explanation for the stuff that I see inside the room. So it turns out, when you're working death scenes or any kind of criminal scene, you've got 2 categories of evidence. Evidence in the room and evidence outside the room. The same is true with these big questions about the nature of our universe. We can either stay inside the universe for answers using all the stuff that's available to us in the universe, given space, time, and matter, the laws of physics and chemistry that govern space, time, and matter. We could stay with just those kinds of explanations. And if we did, our explanations from inside the room, we would say, are completely, philosophically, natural, in the sense that we're only using the stuff that's available to us in the universe, the stuff we identify as nature, space, time, matter, the laws of physics and chemistry, to explain everything we see in the universe. There's another category of explanations, though, and it's outside the room. That there's something other than just the physical answers of that naturalism can provide. Something extra-natural. Something supranatural. Something supernatural. That's the second category of answers. So while there are many questions, there are really only 2 kinds of answers we can offer. If our room we are examining as a crime scene happens to be the universe, we can either rely on naturalistic explanations or extra-natural explanations. Let's take a break, because I think at some point my atheist friends are going to push back and say, well, no, look, dude, there's no 2 categories. The only category is nature. Natural explanations are all that's available to us. Let's talk about that after the break.
Be sure to download the free Cold Case Christianity app from the iTunes Store and the Android Marketplace. The Cold Case Christianity app puts all the resources from coldcasechristianity.com in the palm of your hand. You can read the daily blog, listen to podcasts, and watch videos from within the application. And Jim uses the app to send direct messages to fans of Cold Case Christianity. The app will also link you to all Cold Case Christianity social media and provide you with a direct connection to J. Warner Wallace. Download the app today and become a better Christian casemaker.
Now, there are some people, when examining the kinds of categories of answer you might give to those large kind of worldview questions I offered, those 8 pieces of evidence in the universe, the beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the beginning of life in the universe, the appearance of design in biology, the existence of minds and free agency of those minds, the existence of objective transcendent moral principles, and finally the persistent problem of evil and injustice. These are realities of our universe. We all agree they've got to be explained in some way. And I would say there are 2 possible explanations. One from inside the room, natural explanations, and one from outside the room. But I do understand why some of my unbelieving friends would push back and say, well, Jim, you're wrong about that, because science is permeated, it's built on the premise that we can get answers from the natural world. Okay, I understand that inclination. I've had friends who are not believers who would say, look, at the minute you don't look for supernatural explanations in your crime scenes. Well, yeah, that's because every explanation I have can be explained naturally. But that's another issue. So why should we reject only natural explanations? Accept only natural explanations. Why shouldn't we reject the same way you reject supernatural explanations? Well, that's because I've got a sufficient natural explanation in my crime scenes. Do you think that we have sufficient natural explanations for those 8 questions I just asked? As a matter of fact, we don't. Every one of those questions is an open question. Every one of them to the naturalist. And the very first question, the beginning of the universe, how did this originate, ought to give us a sense that there's something beyond space, time, matter, and the laws of physics and chemistry that govern space, time, and matter, the stuff we've been calling natural. We ought to have a sense that that's not sufficient, just because we know, according to Big Bang cosmology, that everything in the universe came into existence from nothing. In other words, there wasn't space first, and then there was time and matter. No, there was no space, no time, no matter. And I've written about this in God's Crime Scene, but I'm not the first person to write about it. It's very well accepted science on the basis of maybe 5 or 6 different forms of evidence that we are in a universe that has a beginning, and that everything in our universe, all space, time, and matter, came into existence from nothing. And that means that the cause is part of the nothing, not part of the something. You can't create yourself. So we're looking for a cause that doesn't have any of the attributes that we typically assign to nature, to our naturalism. Space, time, matter, physics, chemistry are not available in this kind of explanation because everything comes into existence from nothing. So we automatically should realize that it's not that crazy to assume there's something extra natural. At least one of these explanations is going to have to come from outside the room because it caused the room to come into existence. Is it really that hard for us to take a step in that direction? I think many naturalists now, especially when they're looking at the problem of mind and can we trust our own thoughts, are starting to realize that the strict kind of physicalist, materialist naturalism that has been offered so far is not sufficient to explain things the way they really are. So I think it's time for us to take a look at other explanations. So again, there are many questions. Number 2, there are 2 possible kinds of answers. And I think that the extra-natural, the supernatural answers should be in play if for no other reason you know you can't even answer the first question if you limit yourself to the natural explanations. And here's the 3rd step of my thinking on this. Yes, there are many questions and there are only 2 kinds of answers, but there's only one shared responsibility. There's only one shared responsibility to offer an answer. So look, if you think you're not making an affirmative claim by suggesting that there's no God, well then how do you answer the question of those 8 pieces? Look, I think you got the burden of proof kind of messed up in your own thinking on this. Let me explain it to you this way. If I walk into a crime scene and I'm with a partner, and I say, boy, I see the evidence in this scene. I think it's Joe Smith committed this crime. My partner says, no, I don't think it's Joe Smith. I think it's Mary Jones who committed the crime. Really? Not? Dude, you're wrong. It's Joe Smith. Really? We'll make a case for it being Joe Smith. You make a case for Mary Jones. So now we're both in a position, because we think there are two different causes for the 8 or 9 or 10 pieces or 11 or 100 pieces of evidence in the room. We have to make a case for why I think Joe is the killer. He has to make a case for why he thinks Mary is the killer. The burden of proof is driven by the burden to explain the evidence in the room. That's what gives us a burden. We see certain pieces of evidence in the room, and we have to explain it. And we both have an equal burden to explain what we think caused the evidence in the room. Our causes are different in this case. I think it's Joe. He thinks it's Mary. The same thing is happening here. We have a shared responsibility in a crime scene. We have a shared responsibility in trying to describe the 8 things we see in the universe. You think it's your cause. I think it's my cause. I think the best explanation for the stuff in the room is actually outside the room in a personal divine creator. I'll make a case for this. But you have to make a case too, that you have a sufficient natural explanation for that stuff in the room. I'm saying supernaturalism is demanded and required to explain this evidence. You're saying, no, I can do it with just naturalism. Great. You have a burden though. If you think it's Mary, you have a burden to show me why it's Mary. I have a burden also. I'm willing to accept it. I will show you why it's Joe. That's what we have here, a shared burden of responsibility, a burden of proof. So if you can articulate this for your friends who think that you're the only one as a Christian or as a theist who has this burden, it'll help them to understand, number one, they have a burden too, but you better be ready. This is why we write books, folks. This is why any of us who are doing this are trying to, it's a ministry. Look, I made a living as a cold case detective. I have a show here on NRB TV, and they are ministry partners with me. There is no money in it. Either way, this is about trying to help the viewer to accept their responsibility to be able to answer in a culture that requires us. They think we have a burden of proof. Great. I want to show them they have a burden of proof too, but I want to be ready to answer the call as a Christian casemaker. Are you ready? I hope this show is helping you to get ready. And I'll see you right here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels in the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.